Alright, Gadgeteers, welcome back. So we're going to hang out today, have a little talk about progress with Fedora 29. If you watched my previous video, you know that I took my Yoga 910 and I upgraded it from Fedora 28 to Fedora 29. So it's been about a month, and I'm pleased to say that I'm very, very satisfied with Fedora 29. It's actually worked out really well, and I have very little to complain about. Everything seems to have done well throughout the migration, so all of the applications are working, the hardware is all functioning perfectly, and I've had no strange behavior like crashes or freezes, blackouts, anything like that. Just to give you a little background, right now we are on the Yoga 920 laptop, so I used that as my guinea pig to upgrade to Fedora 29 instead of my production system, which I use for editing and everything else. But on this particular Yoga here, I have done a video edit and I've done my daily work on it. I take it, of course, with me to my actual work when I teach, and it does dual boot into Windows 10 and Fedora 29, which is what I'm usually using. If I don't need to grade any student papers at the time, I'll go ahead and use Fedora 29. I'm so satisfied with the stability that I think what I'm going to do, I have Oracle VM VirtualBox installed. I'm going to start using a virtual machine, and that's actually what I do when I'm in the classroom. I boot into Windows 10 and I have Oracle VirtualBox installed in Windows as well, and I'll use a Fedora virtual machine, but I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to go ahead and use a virtual machine for Windows so that I can do grading and still be in my Linux system. So usually what I do when the students are working in lab or whatever, if they don't need my help, I like to go through and have a look at, I was going to say student comments, but have a look at your comments and respond to them. Some of the comments, of course, regard Fedora specifically, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to run this one command, but oh, I can't because my virtual machine on the Windows side that has Fedora 27 is the older version. I actually want to run this command in Fedora 29, so I really want to get that VM. I've got to pull it from my other computer and then I'll put it on this system. But let's get back to Fedora 29. So let me run the terminal here. I just want to show you real quickly. Let's zoom up a little bit. If I do a uname-r, wrong one. Actually, I wanted to do a uname-a for all. We get the system that we're on. We're on the Yoga 920 here. We're currently on kernel 4.18.16-300. And you can see here FC29. So I am on Fedora Core 29. Not really Core, but still kind of sticking around in the name there. And I do have a 4-core processor here in the Yoga 920, which is wonderful. With this system, with the 16 gigabytes and the 4 cores and the super fast SSD, it's got the 512 gigabyte. I've allocated the majority to Linux, so about, I believe I did 350 gigabytes for Linux, and then the remainder 150 gigabytes or so for Windows. It's not a whole lot for Windows, so it only allows me to do exactly what I need to do, but I really want the majority for Linux anyway. So stability wise, booting, I really, and you can disagree if you want, think that Fedora is one of the most stable operating systems out there. Many people say that it is an experimental OS, so it's not stable, and that is not the case. Fedora just has a 6-month release cycle, but the released product is very stable, if not the most stable Linux version out there. And everybody's opinion is relative to which particular operating system they're using. Some may say no, it's Slackware. Some may say Ubuntu is the best. And certainly if it's working for you and you find it to be very stable, I can see why you would stick with it. But let's talk about Linux in general. I get many people saying that Linux is nowhere near as stable as, say, Windows 10, and I completely disagree with that. I've found that I've had more problems in Windows 10, and I'm talking about recently, because I have been experimenting with games, and of course I have to support Office and Windows 10 environments when I'm doing my job. So I've found that, especially with my desktop system and this laptop, I never have issues. And I know many people say it doesn't support the hardware and so on and so forth. That's not completely true. You can say that certain applications don't support the hardware necessarily, unless you're willing to compile the source code. Otherwise you get more of a basic flavor with a given application. Case in point, Kdenlive, as given with the distribution, which we're on Fedora 29, Kdenlive doesn't compile with support for your GPU. So is that a problem with editing? No. Does it use the processor intensively? Well, yes. I mean, it does, and that's perfectly fine with me. I don't really have a problem with that. So I've launched Kdenlive here, and I use Kdenlive for all my editing, and to me it's wonderful. It does everything that I needed to do, and it is feature rich. So the thing is, of course, again, it doesn't support GPUs, but for me that's a non-issue. So I use Kdenlive for the editing. Other apps that I've used work great. GovCView I usually use to set up the camera, which I'm using right now. I haven't attached any of my 4K cameras or anything like that. OBS, which is running right now doing the recording, Kdenlive, GNU, and oddly enough, the only application I had a problem with initially when I went to Fedora 29, and the funny thing is, after I did the upgrade, I didn't report that there were any problems in that video because I didn't think there was. It was literally maybe a couple weeks later. I ran VLC. Whoops, don't want to do that. And VLC would not launch. It would literally just, start launching and then it would crash and just die. But everything's working great now. VLC is working just fine. I didn't actually do anything. The only thing that I did was an update. So let's just have a quick look here at what's available in the update. I'm not actually going to do the update, but we'll have a quick look and see what's available. I have a feeling it's going to be pretty extensive. I haven't done an update in probably, I would say, about 2 weeks. I usually do updates more frequently than that, and the reason is, one, from a security perspective, it's a wise thing to do. Number two, you want to get the latest updates for your packages, so if you're experiencing any problems, it's best to get those updates, and that's exactly what I did with VLC. To be honest, I didn't even notice it started working because I was just using the built-in video player. So as I'm working, of course, I've got videos here I need to test, so I'll shoot a video and then I'll want to test that video, so I'll launch it and I'll just use the built-in video player, but now VLC is fully operational. So let's see what we've got here. Well, the kernel here is ready to be updated. No surprise there. Pretty much, I would say every 2 to 3 days I get a kernel update for Fedora. GNOME Remote Desktop, VirtualBox, XenLibs. I'll just scroll through here. You can see pretty much everything. QEMU, which of course is used for boxes. Python update. Plasma update. Pretty extensive Plasma updates. LibreOffice update. HTTPD, GNOME, glibc, GCC is getting updated, Flatpaks are getting updated, the Flatpak installer, I assume, elf utils. So a little bit of everything, but I don't want to do the update right now. So I'm going to say no, because I don't want to overtax the system. I'm recording video right now, and if I add things to it, it gets pretty busy. So we're going to hold off on that. One other thing I wanted to say about the Fedora 29 distribution and stability. If you want to see the unstable version of Fedora, you can install the Rawhide repository, and then you'll get an idea of unstable. So this is not Rawhide, and Rawhide is exactly what it sounds like. It's the kind of cutting, bleeding edge, actually, of the Fedora distribution. And if you really want to get an idea of what's new and what's going on, that's what you would install. But this is just the standard Fedora 29 desktop, aka workstation release. Of course, I have Plasma installed, so I have the KDE desktop interface, but what I've done is I always install the GNOME version, the spin with GNOME in it, and then I put the KDE Plasma desktop on so I can switch back and forth. If you do it the other way around, for some reason the switcher doesn't get installed, so I haven't quite figured out how to do that. I'm sure it's pretty straightforward, but it's done for me if I do GNOME first, so it's much, much easier just for me to have the GNOME spin installed first. You may wonder, if I'm always using Plasma, why have the GNOME desktop? Well, there are reasons to use the GNOME desktop. One, I'll be doing testing and work in GNOME to show some feature or what the desktop looks like in the current version of GNOME, or whatever. Maybe I'll have an app that's misbehaving, so I'll try it in the GNOME desktop. And then, of course, we're using Wayland by default, or you can go back to Xorg for your server for the desktop and test that as well. So you get a bunch of different options for testing, and on modern SSDs and modern hard drives, it really doesn't take up that much room, so I go ahead and install both. Of course, life wouldn't be complete without gaming. Now, there's people here who say you can't game in Linux. I'm going to partly agree with that. We are on a laptop after all, so it's not like I would expect us to be able to do any heavy-hitting gaming. Now, I want to show you what I did, and my face is probably covering up my icons, so let me move them down here. I installed Steam. I usually have Steam installed. There are games that I like to play in Steam. Really, what I usually use games for is testing between Linux and Windows, which I've done, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. So we kind of left the area of productivity apps. We're talking a little bit about gaming. One of my favorites, of course, is DOSBox. And I have several games here installed. So let's see. Oops. Let me change directory to Duke 3D. I don't know what it is with the extra D there. There we go. Duke 3D. I'll just use the first CFG configuration file. Now, at first, I wasn't having success with DOSBox. Basically, what would happen is every time I would go to run a game or run Windows 3.11, I would get a crash and automatically it would die. So what I had to do, watch out for CApplet to come up, which is this little, what looks like an engine with a lightning bolt coming out of it in the icon. When it's really small, to me, it just looks like a little flame. But if you bring up SE Linux, what it'll do for you is give you some information. If you go to, let's see, notified. No, I don't want to notify the admin. I am the admin. I meant to go to details. I'm going to email myself. Anyway, in details, what you can do is get specific information to allow just the particular feature that you need. So I've re-enabled, well, actually SE Linux re-enables when you reboot anyway, but how did I figure out the problem? Well, the first thing I did was run get enforce to find out what my status was with SE Linux, and it was enforcing. Then I did set enforce, and I turned it to permissive. Then I tried to run any game or Windows 3.1.1, and of course it worked perfectly. So I went ahead and came back here to my CApplet and found out what I needed to do, and I went ahead and ran the required commands, and I was able to give permission. You can see here in this example I need to do the same thing for TLP, although TLP is working. I need to do that. And then of course I could run games okay. Now I've made the screen a little bit larger, so in my configuration on the last line, was it the last line? No, it wasn't. I made a small configuration change so that this screen is a little bit larger. And I haven't changed much else. Of course I can go full screen while I'm playing, which is fine. And I'll do quit. Yes, I want to quit. And clear, oh no, CLS in DOS. So I've got a couple of games here. I've got Eye of Beholder, I've got Quake installed, an old 25th anniversary Star Trek game, SimCity, the DOS version, which for some reason I got hooked on, the very first SimCity, and I was playing that for quite a while. I have Windows in here as well, so I can get some Windows support. Now this is the actual installer, which has all of the floppies in it, which I use to install Windows for Workgroups 3.11. And of course I can just kill DOSBox. The other thing I have installed that I like to play is Left 4 Dead. And then if I bring up Steam here, I have The Witcher 2 installed. Now here's the thing, I took some notes on frame rates. Well, a little tricky. If you run Witcher 2 in Linux, you're looking at maybe 12 to 20 frames per second, which quite honestly is not all that great. And you're better off running it in Windows, even on this laptop. Now, if I use it on my desktop system with the RX 580 card, I get way better frame rates. So 30 plus on the RX 580 and higher. Windows, on the other hand, and we're talking again about the Yoga 920 with Witcher 2, I get frame rates of between 15 and 30, most of the time hanging around 30. I would say you get to the point where it's playable. Now, I was getting much lower frame rates when I was running OBS, which of course cut back my frames to like 10 to 12, so even in Linux it was really bad. It was unplayable. If I don't have OBS running and recording, it actually does quite well. So it's right on the border of playable. Now I know the real gamers out there are shrieking right now because they want the 60 frames per second. I completely understand. This is just a Yoga 920 laptop with built-in Intel HD graphics. It's not going to be by any means a gaming system. It's just the basics of what I want to do. Left 4 Dead, on the other hand, is very playable. Now, this is the cool thing. Before, I would get, with different versions of Fedora and the older Yoga 910 I had, cutouts, crashes, all kinds of problems. Now, that was, of course, an older version of Fedora. With Fedora 29, and I suspect it would have been fine with Fedora 28 as well, but I wasn't really testing gaming or Steam with Fedora 28. But with Fedora 29, I'm getting 60 frames a second in Left 4 Dead 2 using medium settings 720p. Again, I know you're going to shriek and say that's awful, but it looked great on the screen, so I had no complaints. I went ahead in Windows and did 1280 by 720 high settings and got between 58 and 60. On Windows, I experimented with 1920 by 1080, and it was just too much. I started getting cutouts and freezes, you know, for maybe a third of a second or so, and that was just too much. So I went down to 1600 by 900, and that seems reasonably well. But I really think I'm just going to set it back to 720 because on this screen, it's really not that large. It's 14-inch diagonally. Looks really nice in 720p. For gameplay, I have no complaints at all. So probably with Left 4 Dead, now I'm getting away with perfect stability, 60 frames a second in Linux at 720p medium settings. I'm sure I could go all the way up to all high settings in Linux. And I like playing that game because it's not like you have to buy into a story. You can just select one of the areas you want to go into and just start playing and have a good time. So that's what I do when I'm in Linux as far as games go. Now, are there other games I could install? Absolutely. I've got a little bit more money to spend lately, so I'm looking for suggestions for games I can test in Linux. More than likely, I'm going to test them on my desktop system because it's more of a gamer system, the Dell Ryzen 5675. So I've got the Ryzen 7 processor, 1700, and I've got an 8 gigabyte RX 580. So definitely far superior to what this little laptop can do. But if you have some suggestions for older titles, older AAA titles that you think would work okay on the laptop, let me know, because I would like to try them out and just get them working. So the bottom line here is, if you're thinking about Linux, I do recommend Fedora. There are some things you have to do. Follow my install guide, and I'll post the link in the description. Now, I haven't updated my install guide. It's still for Fedora 28, but it's the same exact thing if you're doing a fresh install. If you do an update, it's even easier. You can go into software and just run the update. So what you need to do, and it's best to do in GNOME because this tool I'm about to launch, of course, is a GNOME tool. Well, anyway, it's loading the catalog. We've got featured applications. I think if you click the Updates tab, you will see up here, if you haven't updated to Fedora 29, that your update is available and you can do the Fedora 29 update. And you can also see here that I'm getting a list of all the different updates that are available. Now, I could select and run a single update. The cool thing about updates here in software in the GUI is it tells you what the update is about and what they plan on doing, something you don't see in the command line, but I'm sure you could address in the command line if you were interested. Anyway, that's one way to do it. The other way you can do is use DNF to do the update, which is the way I chose to do it because it does all the downloading in the background, so you can just keep working, and then it'll tell you it's ready, and all you have to do is issue another command, and it will automatically reboot, install it. It was incredibly fast. I want to say maybe 10 minutes. I haven't checked back at my video doing the Fedora 29 update and see what you think. Now, getting back to operating systems and why I'm thinking Fedora is so far superior to Windows 10. Not only was the update extremely fast, and we're talking about a major OS update here, similar to, you know, the creators updates that come out in Windows 10. There's just no waiting. I mean, everything is so incredibly fast. And of course, when you're doing normal updates, I could, for example, run the updates while I'm working. I do not have to reboot. Yes, some packages do not get installed, but eventually you do reboot, and kernel packages, for example, would get installed. but, well, I shouldn't say installed, they would be loaded. So when you reboot, it's already installed, then it just switches over to the latest kernel when you do the reboot. Because I'm able to do all of the productivity that I want to do, and I have a small sampling here of games that we talked about, to me, Linux is the operating system that works best for me and does what I want it to do. One of the things I still need to do is install my VPN software for Linux. I did have it working about a year ago, and then I ran into problems, and I really haven't done much since. But the VPN I'm using, one of the things they do is they gave me a free year of their VPN if I help them with the Linux drivers, which to me was definitely a fair trade. I think I pay like $30 a year for Linux, or excuse me, for the VPN, so it works out well for me. I like to have the VPN so that if I'm at work or whatever, if I'm in a public network, I can VPN in first, and then I feel a little bit safer when I'm doing things in my system. Anyway, hopefully this video helps you out. If you were thinking about Fedora 29, I strongly recommend it. I remember when I went from Fedora 27 to Fedora 28, there was a little bit of a hiccup, a few bugs. I posted a video on that. You can go back and check it out. That was not the case with Fedora 28 to Fedora 29, and typically for me is the case. So usually when I'm upgrading Fedora, I have no problems. So I'm very satisfied with this update. If you're not getting your feet wet and getting into Linux, you're not going to learn it. I used to run, this was decades ago, I would run a virtual machine of Linux, you know, and just experiment with it. And then I realized, what am I doing exactly? I just need to run Linux. And if I need Windows, I'll run a virtual machine. So that's what I decided to do. This was over a decade now. And quite frankly, I haven't looked back. It was probably 2004, 2005. Do I still use Windows sometimes? Sure, absolutely. Do I still use Mac OS? Yes, of course I have some Macs, but this Yoga 920 is my favorite go-to system, and I use it most often, and it does everything I need it to do, and I do everything I need really in Linux. So watch for a video. I've got another one coming out regarding Hackintoshes. We're going to talk about that. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like and subscribe. If you really liked it, consider sharing it. I always appreciate that. I'll see you next time on Fast Gadgets. This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/FastGadgets.